In today's episode, we're looking at 3 criminals who didn't just run from the law, they were attacked by animals. From a fugitive dragged under by an alligator in Louisiana to another torn apart by a great white shark off the Australian coast. But first, we start with a robbery suspect who thought he could lose the police in the swamps, only to end up in the jaws of something much worse. August 18, 2018 was a sweltering night in southern Louisiana. The heat clung to the air like wet wool, heavy and inescapable, and the dark waters of the Atchafalaya Basin lay still beneath the thick cover of cypress and Spanish moss. Insects hummed in waves, frogs croaked from unseen banks, and something large shifted just beneath the surface. Slow, patient, and perfectly quiet. On nights like these, it's easy to forget how dangerous the swamps can be. But for 28-year-old Deshaun Carter, danger was already on his heels. Deshaun had been on the run for nearly 3 days. A series of armed robberies in Baton Rouge had escalated fast when one turned violent, leaving a bystander wounded and Deshaun's charges upgraded to attempted murder. He was already out on bond for a carjacking earlier that summer, and this time he knew he wasn't getting another chance. The police had his name, his face, and a warrant in hand. So he ran, first in a stolen car, then on foot, ducking through back roads and service lanes, staying ahead of the sirens by minutes at a time. He wasn't a hardened criminal, he wasn't a mastermind. Deshaun had grown up just outside Baton Rouge, bouncing between low-paying jobs, construction, warehouses, whatever was available. By his mid-20s, he had fallen in with a crew pulling off petty thefts and fast cash scams, always looking for the next score. Most of it was low stakes until it wasn't. No one ever accused him of thinking long-term. His record read like a slow unraveling. And by the time he vanished, even the people closest to him had started to assume he wouldn't be coming back. His luck ran out near a shuttered bait shop south of Henderson. He blew a stop sign and nearly hit a parish deputy. When the cruiser gave chase, Deshaun floored it, but the road was narrow and slick with runoff. After just a few minutes, he lost control, clipped a tree, and bailed into the woods without looking back. The dogs came next, along with floodlights and more vehicles. With no weapon and no plan, he sprinted blindly toward the only escape he saw, the swamp. The Atchafalaya Basin is the largest wetland in the United States, stretching across nearly 1 million acres of southern Louisiana. It's a place where people disappear, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. The terrain is a patchwork of bayous, canals, and swamps so thick with undergrowth and water hazards that even locals tread carefully. Gators, cottonmouths, and wild hogs are common, but it's the gators that rule the water. American alligators are ambush predators, silent, territorial, and incredibly well adapted to the murky wetlands they call home. They rely on stealth rather than speed, often lying motionless just beneath the surface with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. In this position, they can observe their surroundings for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Despite their size, they move with surprising agility, using powerful tails to lunge forward in bursts of speed that can catch even experienced hunters off guard. At night, they become even more dangerous. Low light gives them a tactical advantage, and their sensory organs, particularly the pressure-sensitive receptors on their snouts, allow them to detect even the faintest vibrations in the water. It's during these hours that their natural hunting instincts become most active, and they're more likely to perceive unfamiliar movement as a threat or as a meal. Mature males can grow to over 11 feet long and weigh well over 500 pounds, though larger specimens are not unheard of in remote regions. When they attack, it's with brutal efficiency. They aim to kill quickly, biting down with a force of more than 2,000 pounds per square inch, clamping onto their target and dragging it underwater. From there, they perform what's known as a death roll, a violent, twisting motion used to subdue, disorient, or tear apart larger prey. Most animals don't survive the first few seconds, and those that do rarely escape once the roll begins. Deshawn didn't think about any of that when he hit the water. By the time he reached the edge of a narrow canal, he was soaked with sweat and panic. The dogs were behind him, barking furiously somewhere in the trees, and flashlights were sweeping the tree line. Without hesitation, he dove in. The water was warm and thick with algae. Reeds tangled around his legs and the bottom fell away fast. He kicked forward chest deep, trying to keep quiet, trying to stay low. He figured he could make it across, maybe reach the far side and disappear into the woods. What he didn't see was the shape drifting silently toward him from the opposite bank. The gator had been still until then, resting in the shallows beneath a tangle of roots. The movement in the water had caught its attention, and with barely a ripple it closed the distance. Deshawn was halfway across the canal when it struck. The first hit came from the side, fast and violent. The gator lunged upward, jaws open, and slammed into Deshawn's lower back, clamping down across his hip and thigh. He let out a scream that cut through the night, a shrill, panicked sound, but it didn't last long. The gator pulled hard, dragging him under. Deshawn kicked furiously, surfacing once with an arm flailing above the surface. For a second, it looked like he might break free, but then the gator rolled. The spin was brutal. It twisted his torso hard, breaking bone and tearing muscle. His head surfaced briefly, mouth open, eyes wild. He tried to scream again, but the second roll came faster. Teeth sinking into his ribs, spinning him deeper. A cloud of blood spread through the reeds as his body went still. His final breath was swallowed by the swamp. Deputies heard the splashing but couldn't see through the thick brush and darkness. Unsure of what had happened or how many people were in the water, they held their position and radioed for assistance. Between the unstable footing, deep water, and the risk of encountering an armed suspect or aggressive wildlife, protocol was to wait for daylight and trained personnel. By the time wildlife officers and recovery crews arrived the next morning, the canal had gone quiet. The only visible signs of a struggle were a torn sneaker tangled in the reeds and a streak of blood along the mud bank. Searchers spent several hours combing the area by boat and from shore, using long poles and thermal equipment to scan beneath the surface. The water was murky, filled with debris, and visibility was limited. After several sweeps turned up nothing, officials began to suspect the presence of a large alligator. When a gator was spotted nearby, circling boats and showing signs of defensive behavior, it was flagged for removal. 2 days later, the same animal was captured and euthanized under public safety guidelines. At just over 11 feet long, the gator's size and proximity made it the likely suspect. An examination confirmed it had consumed human remains. Inside, investigators found part of an arm, shredded fabric, and a partial pelvis, enough to make a positive ID. The recovery was partial and the body was never fully retrieved. But there was no doubt about what had happened. The canal gave up just enough to tell the story, and then it closed again. Deshawn Carter was identified through fingerprints taken during a prior arrest. His mother was contacted by a detective from the local sheriff's office, the same one who had been assigned to locate and arrest him earlier that week. She declined to speak publicly, and the funeral was held quietly, attended by only a few family members. The case was closed and the warrant was withdrawn. There was no press conference or major media coverage, just a short mention in the local paper noting that a suspect had died in a suspected alligator attack while fleeing police in the Atchafalaya Basin. The article didn't include quotes from law enforcement or family. It didn't need to. For most, the story was already over. Among the officers involved in the search, reactions were mixed. A few expressed regret privately, others called it an unfortunate outcome but not a surprising one. No one expected a situation like this, but no one seemed particularly shocked either. For the victims of the robberies, store clerks, a delivery driver, and the man injured during the final incident, the news didn't bring much relief. There were no charges filed, no restitution, and no court dates ahead. Just an abrupt end to a case that had barely started. Deshaun didn't die in custody or stand trial. He died alone in the swamp, far from the streets where it all began. And by the time the water went still again, there wasn't much left to bring back. The swamp wasn't the only place hiding danger. Thousands of miles away, another man on the run tried to disappear into the ocean without realizing a great white shark was circling nearby. February 6, 2021 was a dry, blistering day on the southwest coast of Western Australia. By early afternoon, the temperature had risen above 38 degrees Celsius, and the remote beaches south of Margaret River sat largely empty. Just beyond the tree line of Borenup Forest, one of those beaches, unmarked, unpatrolled, and rarely visited, stretched out along the coastline. A rough dirt track led through low, scrubbing dunes to a narrow crescent of pale sand where the water remained calm, undisturbed, and open. A white van pulled in and parked near the trail that afternoon. It was an older model with peeling paint and no rear seats, the kind commonly used for temporary work or travel. The driver, 20-year-old Callum Price, had no fixed address. He had been staying in the van for several days. His name was known to police in Perth, where he had recently failed to appear in court on multiple charges, including burglary, assault, and possession of a prohibited weapon. His criminal record dated back to his teenage years, with a long list of minor and mid-level offenses. His most recent charge involved a violent break-in that left one man hospitalized. Rather than turn himself in, Callum had left the city and headed south. He arrived at the beach alone. There were no other vehicles on the track behind him and no footprints on the sand ahead. The sun had begun its descent, but the heat lingered, trapped in the scrub and dry coastal air. A dry wind passed over the dunes, rustling the grass in the shallow troughs between them, and waves rolled in quietly along the narrow shoreline. The beach sat hidden behind a dense wall of bushland and limestone, far from public access points, with no lifeguards, no patrols, and no signage beyond a faded marker several kilometers back, warning against swimming in unmonitored areas. Callum parked the van near a clearing just off the sand and walked the final stretch to the water. He left his clothes and backpack on a flat rock shelf near the high tide line. Inside the bag were his phone, wallet, a bottle of water, and a court summons issued in Perth weeks earlier. The van had become unbearably hot, and with no shade, no fan, and nowhere else to go, the water offered the only real relief. He hadn't planned to swim far, just cool off, maybe float for a while before deciding what to do next. The shoreline was steep and curved between two low headlands, offering no visibility from the road or neighboring beaches. The tide was mid-level and slow, with only a gentle breeze moving the surface. The water was clear and warm. He waded out past the break and began swimming beyond the shallows, crossing the gentle inner reef within a few minutes. From there, the ocean floor dropped away sharply. The bright turquoise color faded into a deeper blue-green as the bottom disappeared beneath him. He kept swimming. The area was known to locals but rarely visited, especially late in the day. It bordered a region frequently monitored by marine scientists for large predator activity. Southern and Western Australia form one of the world's major habitats for great white sharks, drawn by rich feeding grounds filled with seals, rays, and migratory fish. These sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth. Mature adults can reach over 5 meters in length and weigh more than 2 tons. Their bodies are built for short bursts of acceleration, allowing them to ambush prey from below with devastating speed and power. A single bite from a great white is enough to incapacitate most animals. Their jaws, lined with serrated teeth and driven by over 4,000 pounds of pressure, are capable of tearing through bone and muscle in one motion. The water beyond the reef was silent. There were no boats offshore, no visible movement on the beach. The van behind the dunes was out of sight now, and the rocky shoreline had long since vanished from view. Callum treaded water just beyond the drop-off, surrounded by open sea. The current was mild. The only sound was the rhythmic splash of his arms and the gentle slap of water against his skin. Below, near the shadowed edge of the reef shelf, a large figure moved through the water. Its approach was slow, deliberate, and unseen. Great whites often rely on patience in their final approach, using the element of surprise to maximize the impact of their first strike. From beneath, the shape above would have appeared as a lone silhouette, small, isolated, and vulnerable. It moved within range. The shark surged upward in a sudden, powerful burst. The first bite struck across Callum's lower body, shearing through his thigh and hip with catastrophic force. The impact lifted him partially out of the water before dragging him under. A burst of blood spread outward in thick ribbons, turning the clear sea dark. He surfaced again, struggling to stay upright, but the shark had already begun to turn. The second strike clamped across his torso and shook him violently from side to side before pulling him below for the final time. From the shore, the surface of the sea looked untouched, flat, blue, and quiet. A pair of hikers moving along the dunes had paused earlier to glance out at the water. They'd seen a splash, distant and brief, but nothing followed. No shouting, no sign of struggle, just the same unbroken rhythm of waves rolling in beneath the late afternoon sun. They continued walking, unaware that anything had happened at all. The beach remained empty through the evening. The van sat undisturbed just beyond the tree line, its windows cracked slightly in the heat, but no one approached it. By morning it was still there, parked at an odd angle and coated in a thin film of dust. A local resident passing by for an early walk noticed that the same vehicle hadn't moved since the previous day. Curious, they followed the trail down to the shoreline and found a backpack, shoes, and clothing laid out neatly on the rocks, still untouched. The tide had come and gone, but the belongings hadn't been moved or claimed. Concerned, the resident contacted local authorities. Police arrived shortly after sunrise. The van was still parked in the same spot. The engine was cold and the keys were inside. Callum's phone and wallet were in his bag, along with a court summons and half-empty bottle of water. Marine search crews and drones were deployed along the coastline by mid-morning. Small boats scanned the inshore waters and a shoreline sweep began at first light the next day. For 3 days, crews combed more than 15 miles of coastline by land, sea, and air. On the second day of the search, a torn piece of wetsuit neoprene was recovered from a rocky inlet north of the beach. The third day brought the only confirmed human remains, a femur, stripped of tissue and bearing scoring consistent with shark-inflicted trauma. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Callum Price. Tracking data from tagged sharks showed that a large great white had moved through the area less than 48 hours prior to the incident. No animal was located or destroyed. The species is protected under Australian law and may not be culled without direct threat to human life. The beach was closed for 7 days and then reopened with advisory signs warning of potential shark activity. There was no public funeral and no statement released by Callum's family. A short article in a local newspaper mentioned his name in passing, noting that charges had been dropped due to death verification. Officials recorded the incident as an unprovoked shark fatality, one of only a handful that year. The beach where it happened remained open. A warning sign was posted at the access path, but no patrols were added and the area saw little attention in the weeks that followed. The van was towed, held briefly, then quietly scrapped. No memorial was built, no vigil held. Whatever came after was private, and whatever had happened in those final moments remained there. Just one more disappearance in a place where the sea doesn't always give back. The ocean took one fugitive without warning, but in the backcountry of Alaska, it was something much bigger and much louder that caught up with the next. July 27, 2021 began like any other quiet summer morning along the edge of Katmai National Park, Alaska. The air was thin and clean, tinged with the mineral scent of glacial runoff and wild spruce. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and pale, and far off in the distance, the grunts of feeding brown bears echoed softly across the Brooks River. It was peak season for tourists hoping to witness something primal. Massive grizzlies catching salmon in midair or lumbering through the water like ancient machines. But deep in the backcountry, beyond where visitors were allowed to go, another man had come seeking something far more elusive, a way out. Nathan Bellinger wasn't a hiker, a photographer, or a wildlife enthusiast. He was a 42-year-old financial advisor from Seattle, and for the last 10 years he'd made a living not through honest work but through careful deception. Nathan Bellinger had spent most of his adult life projecting the image of quiet success. In Seattle, he was the type who always looked composed, pressed shirts, polished shoes, a calm voice that made people trust him. He lived alone in a well-kept condo overlooking the water, drove a modest luxury car, and told his neighbors he ran a private financial firm. There was no spouse, no children, no visiting relatives. His life appeared clean, orderly, and deliberately quiet. The kind of man people assumed had simply made smart choices early and stayed out of trouble. Polished, poised, and charismatic, Nathan had built a career managing retirement portfolios for small business owners, families, and retirees, people who put their trust and their savings in his hands. For nearly a decade, Nathan ran a small but seemingly legitimate operation, offering financial planning and retirement portfolio management to local businesses and aging clients. Behind the scenes, he'd been moving their money into a web of fake companies and shell accounts registered under alternative names. It started small, just a few $100s here and there, easy to overlook, but over time the numbers grew. By the time an internal audit flagged the discrepancies, over $3.8 million had quietly disappeared. Most of it had been rerouted through dummy LLCs and investment firms that only existed on paper, then transferred out of state or offshore. The clients never saw it coming. He didn't wait for the indictment or the handcuffs. Instead, he disappeared into Alaska under a false name, arriving by float plane and heading for an abandoned trapper's cabin he remembered from a guided fishing trip years earlier. It was a long-forgotten structure tucked between two ridges, not listed on any official maps and far enough off the main trails to avoid casual discovery. To Nathan, it was perfect, off-grid, untraceable, and quiet enough to buy him time to think. For the first 2 days, he kept to himself, rationing food and listening to the forest breathe around him. He slept with his pistol beside him and stayed alert, certain he'd been followed even if no one appeared. Then, on the third morning, he found something that confirmed his suspicions. A boot print by the stream bed and a discarded gum wrapper still shining with moisture. Too fresh, too close. Someone had been near the cabin, maybe watching. That was all it took to push him into motion. Katmai National Park is home to one of the densest populations of brown bears anywhere in the world. During summer months, over 2,000 bears congregate across the region to feed on the spawning salmon that crowd the rivers and streams. These are not inland grizzlies, but coastal brown bears, larger, heavier, and more dominant due to their rich marine diet. Males in peak condition can weigh well over 1,000 pounds and display highly territorial behavior, especially during feeding season. Despite the park's reputation for bear viewing, fatal attacks remain rare. Between 1980 and 2021, Katmai recorded only a small handful of serious bear encounters, most involving off-trail hikers or those violating safety protocols. But when those rare attacks occur, they are often swift and impossible to stop. Stuffing his bag with food, his weapon, and what little cash he had left, Nathan set out on foot, cutting through the thick alder and willow, trying to reach the ridgeline where he believed he could find a vantage point or a way out. What he didn't realize was that his chosen path led straight into the territory of a massive coastal brown bear, a dominant male in the area known for aggressive behavior during peak salmon season. Weighing close to 1,200 pounds and scarred from years of combat over food and mating rights, the bear had carved out a territory around the riverbend where the salmon were thickest and competition was fiercest. Nathan didn't see the signs: the flattened bedding grass, the fresh scat, the half-eaten salmon left steaming on a rock. He walked right past them. Focused only on getting away from imagined pursuers, he was oblivious to the very real predator watching from just beyond the tree line. The bear emerged in silence, a wall of fur and muscle that seemed to materialize from the brush. Nathan turned at the last second, just in time to lock eyes with the animal. A deep black stare that held no fear, no hesitation. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Nathan did what so many do when faced with something they can't fight. He ran. But bears are not like men. They do not hesitate, do not second guess. With one powerful surge, the bear crashed through the brush behind him, covering ground with horrifying speed. Nathan sprinted through the undergrowth, heart pounding, lungs burning, until a root caught his foot and sent him sprawling to the ground. He scrambled, tried to push himself up, but the bear was already on him. The first strike came fast, a massive paw crashing down on his back, flattening him into the moss with a wet thud. Then came the bite. The bear's jaws clamped around Nathan's thigh, and with a brutal twist, muscle and skin tore free. He screamed, a raw and broken sound that echoed through the trees, but there was no one to hear it, no one to help. The bear bit again, this time higher, closer to the hip. Nathan's body arched in pain, his hand fumbling toward the pistol, but he couldn't reach it. The bear shifted its weight and sank its teeth into his lower abdomen, lifting and shaking him until blood sprayed in a wide arc across the leaves. His screams became wet and gurgled as blood filled his mouth. He twisted, tried to crawl, tried to survive, but it was no use. The bear was relentless. With a final movement, the bear rose and slammed both forepaws down onto Nathan's back. His spine gave way beneath the weight and his body convulsed. The bear bit once more, this time into the base of his skull, and pulled back hard. There was a sickening crunch, and then everything went still. When rangers located the site 2 days later, they weren't even searching for a missing person. A wildlife biologist had reported hearing something unusual. Brief, human-like screams, but no distress calls had come through, and there were no hikers officially registered in the area. The recovery team wasn't expecting to find much. What they discovered was a scene that left little doubt as to what had happened. The ground was disturbed and soaked with blood. Clothing was shredded and scattered across the brush. A boot, a damaged backpack, and a partially buried pistol were found nearby. A lower jawbone with a gold-capped molar was recovered a few yards away, along with drag marks leading into deeper vegetation. The rest of the body was never fully found. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Nathan Bellinger. Once identified, the case was quietly handed off to federal authorities. The police had been tracking Nathan for months, investigating a string of embezzlement and financial fraud charges involving several $1 million. With his death confirmed, the case was closed. His family declined to speak to the media. There was no public funeral. The clients he defrauded, many of them retirees and small business owners, were notified of his death, but it brought little comfort. Most of the money was unrecoverable, and with no estate left behind, there were no civil proceedings. The Park Service filed the incident as a fatal bear encounter in a restricted area. No charges were filed and no further search was conducted for the bear involved. Officials emphasized that the man had been trespassing in a closed section of protected land without a permit, far from designated trails or campsites. Thanks for watching this video. If you loved this video, you'll definitely also love the one on your end screen right now. Hope to see you there.